If I see any of these placements in your birth chart, one of the first questions I'm going to ask you is about your relationship to anger. And I already know I'm going to be onto something. We actually need anger. It's what allows us to say no, to set a boundary, to stick up for ourselves and protect ourselves. But so many of us grow up with warped relationships to anger, and we start to fear it, suppress it, dissociate from it. We feel guilty about it. We'd rather turn it inward. Or perhaps we've learned to overemphasize anger, and it's hard for us to get to the vulnerable authenticity underneath. And when we have a warped relationship with anger, it goes from healthy to unhealthy real quick, because chronically unexpressed anger looks like anxiety, depression, avoidance. It manifests as rage, and it has been proven to be associated with chronic illness and especially autoimmune conditions. And I know this is coming up for a lot of you, given the current transits we're living through. So I just wanted to pop off about a few placements, aspects, patterns, and give you some additional context or some ideas about what might be going on here in this part of your chart. Now, keep in mind, we do look at the entire birth chart to really get the full picture, so take this with a grain of salt. Let me know in the comments if you can relate. And without further ado, let's jump in. So in the first video, I talked about Saturn opposing Mars, but we need to talk about Saturn conjunct Mars or Saturn square Mars as well. Saturn is ideally representative of the father, and ideally it's the type of protection that we get from the father. So if we didn't have that protection, or if we started to internalize the belief that we are not worthy of that protection, what Saturn starts to do is protect us by limiting us. And this is where we get stuck. This is where we see the superego and criticism come up. You want to go say something and Saturn's like, nope, you're going to sound dumb. You want to take action. Saturn's like, nope, you're not going to do it right. And when we break it down, I guess we could see how that's like protection, but ultimately it doesn't serve us. So when Saturn is conjunct Mars, there's a whole complex associated with how you can express that Mars energy. In many cases, I feel like these are people that tend to repress it or hold on to it. And ultimately, when we're engaging in that pattern, it's only a matter of time before it pops off. So I'm wondering if Saturn is conjunct Mars, for example, if you engage in these patterns of avoidance, or if maybe if you struggle with depression, you feel almost like stuck within yourself. If that's the case, how can we acknowledge and even thank Saturn for trying to protect Mars, but also let these placements know that they don't need to operate by the same logic anymore? When Saturn conjunct Mars is healed and at its best expression, you guys are playing the long game. But if it is suppressed, all of that suppressed energy just gets stuck in your body. Now, if you have Saturn square Mars, but I'm even gonna go with Saturn square something like Mercury, that looks more like a little bit of irritation. It's almost like you go to express the feeling and Saturn's over here like, you might be wrong. You're probably not worthy of feeling this anyway. Saturn is hindering our ability to express our instinctual reaction, our instinctual drives that Mars represents, which isn't to say we should be all willy-nilly just expressing Mars without any regard, but with the square to Saturn, it lands so much more personally and it tends to manifest as self-criticism. Saturn in the chart is ideally where we can step into our own authority, but it is imperative that we identify whatever the narrative is that comes up for us so we can start to make the necessary adjustments. Next, if you have Mars in the 8th house, you guys knew this one was coming, because the 8th house feels very shadowy. It feels very overwhelming and overpowering, and it's similar to the 12th house, but also different. The 12th house is much more suppressed and repressed. We don't always know that we're running from something. With the 8th house, we have awareness, but we also have a great amount of shame and fear about letting that be expressed. I want to know what your experiences have been that led to you feeling unsafe in your own body. I'm also wondering, and this is going to depend a lot on the zodiac sign that it's in and any aspect that's making, but what is so scary for you about expressing yourself in that way? Because whatever we have in the 8th, we will want to keep hidden, because the fear is if you see this, if you have access to it, I'm going to be completely overpowered. I'm going to be totally dependent on you. I'm also going to have to deal with all the shame associated with whatever we're repressing in the 8th house. First, we got to identify how this pattern originated. What was the story? And I think what's really important too is to be able to validate how this pattern has served us in the past. A lot of times our most self-destructive and self-sabotaging behaviors were originally the greatest forms of protection we had access to. But now we've got to find a different way to relate to that energy. The 8th house also brings up a lot for me about any attachment wounds or attachment fears. So I'm wondering if perhaps you learned that suppressing your anger was like necessary in order to maintain your attachments, or there wasn't room for you to express your own because you were too busy navigating and fielding it from other people that you loved and depended on. Either way, the more we try to suppress and repress whatever we have in the 8th house, the louder it's going to show up in other ways, like self-destruction, self-sabotage, finding different ways to assert control or maintain a sense of power over our own body. But when 8th house placements are healed, this is the house of transformation. This is sacred anger, intuitive anger, highly protective anger. But let's make sure that we're engaging with those protective qualities the right way. Next, if you have Mars retrograde in your chart, anytime we have a planet that's retrograde in our chart, it simply means that our relationship to the energy or the expression of that planet tends to be more introspective at first. We are really going to think and process and kind of try to develop a deeper understanding of those impulses before we express them, which can actually be really helpful when we understand what's going on. The house placement and the zodiac sign are going to give us a lot more information about the specifics here, but I think one of the traps for Mars retrograde is that all of that anger, all of that primal energy, the protectiveness, all of it gets really stuck in the body, or we feel like we need to be able to explain it. Like, I can't express myself in this way until I have a very valid reason. But then ultimately, by the time we find that reason, it's like moments passed, and then we're left with all of that adrenaline and cortisol and everything just flooding our body. I wonder if it feels safer for you to direct that anger towards yourself. It at least feels like it's more in control. All things shadowy, all things that we want to suppress and run away from, first of all, we can't really run away from, and second of all, more than half the work is simply letting it be expressed and acknowledging it, validating it ourselves. So get into the habit of finding some way to let it out without feeling the need to explain it. All right, we've got to talk about Mars in Libra. Through the psychological lens, which of course you know by now is my jam, Libra brings up the question of the childhood role, because Libra walks into a room and is immediately like, I know who I am based on who the environment needs me to be. Libra is balancing and juggling a lot at all times, but the relational stuff is always such a core focus for Libra. The tendency for Libra is to say, okay, well, I can do without expressing this or having this need met. That's fine. I'll put your needs first, which again can be beautiful, but often ends up being exploited, especially if those patterns do originate in childhood. Now we're just talking about a trauma response. Mars needs to be able to assert itself, and Mars in Libra has this fear. How is this going to impact other people? How is this going to impact my environment? Like, is there room for me to assert my needs and my anger? By the time we have that understanding, the moment has passed, it's already fizzled out, and our body is absorbing everything we refuse to express. Libra, you guys are social conduits. You are harmonizers. Empathy and consideration are etched into who you are as a person. But the way you really show up for the people you love and actually honor the gifts of Libra, you have to honor yourself. I'm running out of time, so I've got to wrap this one up for now, but stay tuned for the next one, and I love you all.